So I would like to say hello and welcome to the Robert H. Jackson Center. I'm sorry I did not have much time to mingle with you all during the cocktail time, but I am Kristen McMahon, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Jackson Center. And we are thrilled that you are with us this evening to hear from Consul General Gill and to eventually share a meal with us. So thank you for being here. I will do a slightly more fulsome introduction when we move downstairs for the dinner. I do not want to hold us up here. So I will introduce the architect behind tomorrow's educational seminar and have him share with you the story about how tonight and how tomorrow came to be. So let me introduce Gregory Peterson, who will moderate the discussions tomorrow. He is of counsel with Phillips Lytle, LLP, and he is a well-lauded attorney locally, statewide, and nationally, and internationally. And the Jackson Center was born from his brain, and we continue to celebrate him as our co-founder, past president, and board chair. So Greg, thank you.
A live performance, cool. Wow, I am so thrilled to have this. And live for the fact that this particular evening and tomorrow's activities are about 4 years in the making. 4 years, and so I'm thrilled this finally has come together, and especially tonight, because we're here to not only commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Robert Jackson Center, of which as I look out in this crowd, I see a lot of people who were responsible for making that a reality. The fact that we are also at the end of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg Trial, a trial of which our namesake, Robert Jackson, deemed to be the most meaningful part of his illustrious career. We have here had a chance to pause and reflect on his career, which you know is the answer to the Jeopardy question. Name the only person who was a Solicitor General, Attorney General, and a Justice of the Supreme Court. Robert Jackson, a resident of Jamestown, New York. That's cool. But most importantly is the fact he was the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg Trial. And to be able to have tonight, on almost to the day, the 75th anniversary of the judgment at Nuremberg, to have such a distinguished person in the form of Consul General David Gill here in person, representing the Federal Republic of Germany. This is terrific. I can't tell you how excited I am. And that this is not the first time we have connected. In fact, Matthew Collard, who was the Consul General in Buffalo, Matthew is here back there, with Eva Maria Marks, who made this all a reality, you know, on behalf of the Consul General. Thank you both, because it was Matthew who I'd met previously, and we've gone up there and we'd had meetings to figure out where there was commonality between our work at the Robert Jackson Center, specifically Nuremberg Trial related, and Buffalo, the Buffalo Council. And Matthew has led that admirably for many years. And so we connected, we had meetings, but most importantly, he brought me up for a luncheon in 2017, December of 2017. I have the email. And I was excited about meeting you and having a chance to meet the number 2 guy in our country from Germany. And the fact that we've had a chance a little before and after to come to New York City and to have programs where we brought in Melissa Jackson, Robert H. Jackson's granddaughter, for an event commemorating the Nuremberg Trial with other people there, and that in fact your counsel to the Consul General, Tanya Bayer, was here dedicating the statue which you see out front there, our rededication. She was here as our principal speaker. So we have a connect. We have a connect. And as Kristen will provide a little bit later, a fuller biography, I will not preclude the time or take away the time that he wants to share with us. But our relationship with Germany and the Jackson Center really goes back to our beginning. Many of you here in this room were with us the first time we went to Nuremberg and was entertained by the Bavarian government, entertained by the federal government, and given the royal tour because we somehow manifested Robert Jackson, the architect of the Nuremberg Trial. And we felt pretty good. And we've been back several times, and Kristen was just back 2 weeks ago commemorating the 75th anniversary of the actual rendering of the judgment. And we have a memorandum of understanding with the Bavaria and with the city of Nuremberg and with the process center, documentation center. So we've been exchanging educational programs. And I want to just report that. And our goal, hopefully by you coming here, kicking the tires, looking at this place, seeing that we're real, hopefully that relationship will be enhanced. I don't know if I've done anything about introducing you other than as Consul General of New York City and the fact that he was born in 1966. And if you really want to know about Consul General Gill, show up tomorrow. We have a full morning of activities, of which we have Nancy Thorndike Greenspan over here. We have Arthur Downey and his lovely wife are here. They'll all be parts together with David Gill in discussing their aspects of the Cold War. And I'm looking at the demographics of the crowd, and I can tell you they remember the Cold War. They remember the Cold War. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce and bring up Consul General David Gill.
Thank you, Greg, for the kind introduction. Guten Abend, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Dear Mr. Peterson, dear Ms. McMahon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor and joy for me to be with you here today at the end of the commemorative year marking the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials, or to be precise, of the military tribunal. And actually, almost on the day, 3 weeks and 75 years ago, the judgment was given on October 1st in Nuremberg. Thank you for inviting me to this imposing place, indeed imposing, which is committed to the principles of equality, fairness, and justice, and the upholding of the rule of law in Jackson's sense. I myself grew up in the part of Germany where the rule of law was repressed for another 40 years after the end of Nazi Germany. In East Germany, where freedom and democracy remained a yearning of the people, but only became reality with the peaceful revolution 32 years ago. Hence, I was all the more fascinated by Robert H. Jackson when I looked a little more intensively into his biography in preparation for today's appointment. Robert Jackson, the US-American chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, who, as if this were not enough for one life, fulfilled so many other influential roles. We heard it already by Craig. What an incredible life. Coming from a humble background, he had a clear goal in mind from a young age. He wanted to become a lawyer and commit himself to justice. He must have had this judicial sense in his blood when he took his first steps in an unprecedented legal career as a paralegal right here in Jamestown at the age of 18, with great legal skills and passion. Without ever having formally graduated from a law school, let alone Harvard or Yale. He held all the most influential positions imaginable for a lawyer in this country: Solicitor General, Attorney General, and US Supreme Court Justice. Finally, together with international partners, he made legal history. First in drafting the London Charter of the International Military Tribunal, which later provided the legal basis for the Nuremberg trials. And then on the ground in Germany as chief prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg Military Tribunal against the Nazi regime's major war criminals. The international victorious community could not have made better use of the small window of opportunity that emerged after the end of World War II by conducting such a fundamental trial. What moved Robert Jackson and many of his comrades in arms in the preparation of the Nuremberg trials, and for which he worked intensively, was the conviction that the appropriate means of atoning for war, guilt, and crimes against humanity, cruelty, and inhumane injustice would be a verdict according to law, and not revenge or the demonstration of power by the victors. This was a lesson of history, but at the same time, a visionary setting of the course for the rapid development of international criminal law. Incidentally, this has not had an influence on international criminal law alone. Also, national transformation processes have benefited from it. Placing justice above revenge and retribution was also a guiding principle for us in East Germany. For example, when we agreed on how to deal with the employees or the high officials of the Stasi, the secret police, and the communist regime. The primary goal of the four chief prosecutors from the United States, France, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union was to establish the individual guilt of the perpetrators and to punish them according to the new norms of international criminal law, which emphasized individual responsibility. In his opening remarks of the indictment against the 24 principal defendants, Robert Jackson summarized the dimension of the trial as follows: that four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law, is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. End of the citation. For the victorious powers, the Nuremberg trial were a major and unprecedented task. It was the first international criminal trial in history. In addition, there were very fundamental challenges: 4 trial languages, the use of interpreters, new technology, and audio recording that are today still impressive. And all this shortly after a devastating war in a country that was largely destroyed and in ruins. 218 intense days of trial followed in room 600 of the Nuremberg Palace of Justice. A large international team of sometimes up to 700 people worked on the hitherto unique project of holding German politicians, military officers, and SS or NSDAP functionaries criminally responsible for the planning, preparation, initiation, and execution of the war of aggression, for crimes against the civilian population and prisoners of war, and for mass murder in the extermination camps. Every single day of the trial gave light to the darkest chapter of our German history. To this day, the transcripts and audio recordings are important testimonies for scientific studies and the reappraisal of our past. 250 newspaper and radio reporters made sure that the verdict on October 1st, 1946 went around the world and that the images from Nuremberg entered the collective memory of mankind. It was the well-known German historian, Heinrich August Winkler, who underlined the importance of Nuremberg as follows. The reprehensibility of the acts was so great that the sense of justice would have been incomparably more injured if these crimes had not been atoned for. Of the 24 defendants, 12 were sentenced to death and 7 to imprisonment. 3 other defendants were acquitted and 2 cases were dropped without conviction. This differentiation in the verdicts alone, which, by the way, was not met with unanimous appreciation, shows the court's seriousness and fidelity to the law. Thus, the Nuremberg trials, this first international criminal trial in history, became the basis for universal international criminal law. And they paved the way for an international criminal justice system, for an international order based on law and order. Exactly 1 year ago, the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, spoke in room 600 at the Nuremberg Palace of Justice, where the trial had taken place, and praised what he himself called this groundbreaking idea as, I quote, a revolution that not only wrote legal history, but also world history. Indeed, in Nuremberg, the trials not only laid the foundation for coming to terms with the Nazi era in Germany, Nuremberg, of all places, the city where the National Socialists ostentatiously staged themselves at the Reichsparteitage, the Reich Party Congresses, became the birthplace of a new understanding of law and justice that continued to unfold in the years that followed. Without the Nuremberg trials, the International Criminal Court in The Hague would also not exist today. As an independent, permanent court, the International Criminal Court, ICC, punishes genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. It does not replace national courts, which can and should punish these crimes, but acts when a country's law enforcement agencies ignore them. Its very existence thus has an appellative as well as a preventive effect. Germany also, against the background of its own experience and history, was one of its staunchest supporters from the very beginning, because it closed a gap in international law enforcement, and our support continues unreservedly. My country is convinced that the ICC is making an effective contribution in the struggle for greater justice and in the fight against impunity for the most serious crimes that affect the international community as a whole, and is thereby increasingly gaining universal significance and acceptance as a World Criminal Court. And so we are actively working to ensure that the ICC is not only able to operate as effectively as possible, but also enjoys broad support in the international community. By no means all states have recognized the jurisdiction of the court. Your country didn't either. Our hope is that the many states that have acceded to the treaty will be joined by others, so as to ensure the most effective, functional, independent, and thus credible international criminal justice system possible, in the interest of the international order and also in the interest of the victims of the greatest crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the military tribunal, as well as the other trials in Nuremberg, were also important for educating the German public about the crimes of the National Socialists, the state, and the Wehrmacht. This succeeded to a certain extent, and acceptance of the trial was also found among a clear majority of Germans. It is disputed how substantial this clarification was and whether the focus on the main criminals also had an exonerating effect on the many other perpetrators. In other words, there is some reason to believe that some Germans felt that atonement had been reached through the Nuremberg trials and that there was little appetite to continue to search out other war criminals who were seen to be only people following orders. Nevertheless, the Nuremberg trials showed that a public criminal trial can be an important impetus for individual confrontation with the past and for sharpening one's own awareness of law and justice, not only for the present generation, but also for future generations. To this day, our understanding of human rights, of our individual responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity is significantly shaped by the Nuremberg trials, further developed in the Rome Statute, the legal and working basis of the International Criminal Court. Therefore, I'm all the more irritated that the Nuremberg trials have been and are being ideologically abused in the past and even today. For example, today you can read of COVID deniers threatening political opponents to go on trial in what they call a Nuremberg trial 2.0 because of decisions they made during the pandemic. What a misinterpretation of history and political impudence. Yes, the abuse of historical events and relativizing of crimes endanger our society. They create and they breed ground for lawlessness and endanger the pillars of our democratic community, like the freedoms we enjoy, the separation of powers, human rights, and the rule of law. The more time passes, the more important the work of institutions like the Jackson Center here or the Nuremberg Trials Memorial in Germany becomes. It was, is, and will remain crucial to keep alive the memory of important milestones in legal history and to inform subsequent generations about the roots of our understanding of law, justice, and individual responsibility for crimes. This is what you are taking care of here in Jamestown with great commitment and persevering passion. For the honorable and so important goal of preserving the legacy of Robert H. Jackson, you have inspired many visitors, students, volunteers, many young people. This is impressive to see because knowledge about what happened, the memory of the crimes processed in Nuremberg, and especially the motivations and the spirit of Jackson will be passed on to and inspire future generations. I would like to extend my congratulations and sincere thanks to Gregory Peterson as one of the founders of the center. The exhibitions, exchange programs, internships, and school projects, your commitment to building international networks and the international humanitarian law dialogues are just a few examples of the variety of initiatives which you all here at the center work from Jamestown. They ensure that the legacy of Robert Jackson, as well as milestones of legal history such as the Nuremberg trials, are kept alive. I'm sure that your work here at the Jackson Center has already had a lasting inspiration and decisive impact on very many people. Robert Jackson, who was so passionate about his goals, is a role model for many. People like him are needed today and will be needed in the future just as much as they were back then. I sincerely wish you all the best for your important future work here at the center in Jamestown. Thank you for your attention.